This videotape of the Great Flood of '94 is a combination of the efforts of many. In particular, we dedicate this film to the memory of Russell Sheffield, who was assisting with the preparation of this effort at the time of his death in September 1996. We salute Lee College in Baytown, who stepped in and finished the job. A tip of the hat to those who shared their amateur videotapes. Proceeds from the sale of this project will be divided equally between the Liberty County chapter of the American Red Cross and the Spirit of Sharing charity in South Liberty County. Both helped literally thousands of people whose lives were changed forever. The voices you will hear during this production are those of Bill Buchanan and Tiffany York of KSHN-FM radio in Liberty, Dayton, Texas. The majority of their listening area was swamped, literally and figuratively, as devastating flooding, coming first from record rains and then from Lake Livingston, ravaged businesses and homes. The staff of KSHN Radio worked non-stop, as did so many, reporting the events, warnings, and updates to listeners more than a little concerned about what was happening so very fast. At the same time, they also fought to keep the radio station on the air, despite rising water in their offices and studios. Around 3:30 in the morning, October 15th, the police department alerted KSHN that the rainwater was going places it had never gone before. In 12 minutes, KSHN Radio was on the air. Buchanan and York were the first two called in. Officials turned to KSHN Radio to make every announcement about rapidly changing conditions. As other communication systems became overloaded and in some cases failed, the station was used to get word to emergency workers. Evacuations, breaking water lines, and washed-out levees were the norm and not the exception. Station announcers broadcast school and business information, reports about roads and streets, and work status reports for industrial and business employees. Red Cross shelters were opening on high ground, and hundreds were migrating to them as soon as KSHN announced their location. Often, KSHN radio news cars transported residents from their homes to the shelters. At one point, the battery from a news car was moved to a boat to power the live broadcast equipment to report damage in the business district. Since no one but emergency personnel was allowed in those areas for several days, this was the first word most business owners and operators knew of the condition of their own stores and offices. For those who lived through it, you already know. For those who weren't there, the spirit of this community didn't just survive. It bloomed into compassion, love, and understanding. When you speak of the Great Flood of '94, you will remember the indomitable spirit of our wonderful people.
The Travis Park evacuation was interesting. We had gone out there to check the water levels, realized it needed to be evacuated, and the fact was if we had been 30 minutes later, we would have had to boat people out instead of being able to drive them out. The other thing was, a new experience was the central portion of town just being completely isolated by the water, which was not something we had experienced before. And the decision as to how to handle that, of course, was joint with city manager, the mayor, us, the fire marshal, discussing the possibilities. And as you recall, that morning it was, we weren't allowing anybody in. We didn't know when the water would go down. We had some real safety concerns. Well, later that afternoon, we did allow people to go in if they could show ID that they lived there.
When the Great Flood of 1994 hit Liberty County, and 16 other counties of southeast Texas, it changed the lives of us all forever. This videotape is not to relive the heartbreak, but to celebrate the spirit of the people who lived through it. No lives were lost in Liberty County, but damage losses in the tens of millions of dollars were recorded. We had hoped to pull together large quantities of videotape, but there just wasn't that much available. Most citizens were otherwise preoccupied. However, I think you will agree that what is here goes a long way to tell our story. There's so much we want to tell you, we won't try to narrate the tape as you're seeing it, but instead we'll tell you some facts about those events of mid to late October 1994 as you watch the water go by. We are eternally grateful to those who shared their videotapes with us to make this presentation. Their names are mentioned at the conclusion. A very special salute to the memory of Russell Sheffield of Sheffield Video Services. Russell died suddenly in September of 1996 after having helped greatly to edit this tape into its finished form.
Now our story. It's not like we thought anyone might want to revisit the Great Flood of 1994, but this narration does give us a chance to put the major events into a recognizable sequence. That in itself is no easy task. Things just happen so fast and in such a dramatic and unpredictable manner. Not all of, but the majority of our story told here pertains to the city of Liberty because it is from there we have the most information. All of the rural subdivisions up and down the Trinity and Liberty County were every bit as hard hit by the rains and the flood from Lake Livingston that followed. When the big rains began that Monday, it was October 17, 1994. The ground was already saturated with over 9 inches of rain from Saturday through pre-dawn Monday morning. The torrential downpour that began Monday was from the remnants of a Pacific hurricane that made its way across Mexico and into the Gulf of Mexico, combining then with moisture-laden air over Texas. Widespread street flooding caused a nightmare for Liberty residents and city workers alike.
Well, I guess the high points would have been the number of rescues that we had to do and the total amount of participation that the fire department did and the EMS did. Some of the low points were that we didn't have enough sleep. We started on Monday and some of the crews didn't get any rest until late Tuesday night, and then some of the command staff were not able to leave the command post or the emergency operations center until sometime Thursday.
East of China in Jefferson County on Highway 90, the road was covered with over 2 feet of water Tuesday morning, cutting Liberty off from Beaumont. Many of the farm to market roads in Liberty County were closed because drainage ditches just couldn't handle the rainfall. Very early on, most of the roads and bridges into Riverside subdivisions were cut off by high water. Beaumont Avenue, Cornell, and many other streets in the city of Liberty had several homes flooded. Oak Forest subdivision off North Main Street in Liberty had water in many houses and streets became impassable. First floor apartments and 2 apartment complexes on Cook Road near the Liberty City Park were also flooded, and some residents had to evacuate. Trinity and Travis Street near the courthouse square were covered in water, and in a number of spots water was pushed into various buildings, including KSHN radio, operating around the clock to broadcast weather and rescue information. Radio staffers stripped off shoes and socks and waited about the building as work continued. Owner of that building, Bud Lee, set up pumps at the front and back door to keep matters from being worse.
On North Travis Street, homes in Travis Park subdivision were high and dry for the moment, but the subdivision was cut off by high water over the entrance road, made worse by the fact that the street had recently been stripped of all asphalt for a scheduled repaving project. Most of the businesses along Main Street were closed Tuesday because of high water that inundated parking lots in some buildings. Burnham Auto Country and BJ Ford Mercury suffered huge losses to new and used car inventory as the rainwaters crept up inside the interior and the engines of the cars. And remember, the river floodwaters had still not reached most of Liberty County yet. This was just from the record-breaking rainfall dumped on the city. The previous all-time record rainfall in Liberty was in 1977 when 13 inches was recorded in the U.S. Weather Service gauge at KSHN radio in just 8 hours. Many businesses did suffer some damage on that occasion, but most was just to floor coverings.
In those early hours of the rain flood of 1994 here in Liberty and elsewhere across the county, there were no shortages of heroes. Dozens rescued people who awoke to find water in or very near their homes. Cars flooded where they sat parked or with passengers inside trying to escape the rising rainwater. Our lives all changed, minute by minute. From that early Monday morning on, our history would be rewritten with new adjectives coming almost hourly across Liberty County. School officials agonized over closing schools. Then word came first from Liberty, then Dayton, Hardin, Hull-Dayzetta, and finally every school district in Liberty County came to a standstill. Those fighting the onslaught of the water numbered in the hundreds, even thousands when you count neighbors helping neighbors and strangers helping strangers. But still the skies continued to dump the rain. By 9 a.m. Monday morning, Liberty County Judge Dempsey Henley had asked Governor Ann Richards to declare this county a disaster area and call for an evacuation of all low-lying sections in the county. A positive response from the governor's office was immediate. The National Guard, Coast Guard, Department of Public Safety, and all were on their way. But there would be more, much more. Later on Monday, October 17th, the Trinity River Authority hydrologist turned up discharges flowing from the gates of Lake Livingston, some 88 winding river miles to the north.
Now listen to this. On Sunday night, the 16th of October, releases from the Lake Livingston dam gates were not bad at all at 13,000 cubic feet of water per second. But by Monday night, discharges had been increased to an all-time record high release of 110,600 cubic feet of water per second. Like I said, it was still Monday night. The reason was clear. While here in Liberty County, Mother Nature was pounding us with record rainfalls, up on Lake Livingston, they got even more, from 14 to 16 inches of rain right on the lake Sunday night. Had the rain fallen well upstream from the lake, some plans could have been made and the increases could have been more gradual. But with the downpour right on top of the lake, the faster the rain came, the faster they had to increase the discharges. It was the forerunner to Liberty County's worst ever disaster. Downstream, all we could do was brace for it. You only had to go back 4 years to 1990 to find the previous record lake releases. It was in May 1990 when the gates were opened to discharge 100,800 cubic feet per second, producing a river gauge reading at the Highway 90 bridge gauge here at 30.03 feet above sea level. In 1990, around-the-clock sandbagging efforts kept the river out of town, except in some very few low areas. Rural subdivisions along the river were hurt badly in 1990, but those areas sustain damage every time the Trinity River gets up to 24 feet above sea level. 24 feet is the official flood stage here in Liberty. At 30.03 feet above sea level in 1990, it was the worst test ever for the city of Liberty and for many other areas not previously flooded, but we won that battle.
But now it was October 1994. All of the damage done to this point, that Monday night, was from the torrential downpour locally. When rain subsided, the water ran back out of those places it had reached, and many began to clean up, despite the fact they were about to see water rush right back into their homes and businesses. The river flood from Lake Livingston was rushing toward us. Remember, water traveling through the gates of Lake Livingston Dam takes almost 2 full days to reach the river gauge on Highway 90 in Liberty, Texas. An emergency command post was set up on the grounds and inside the city of Liberty Fire Department and EMS building. One by one, emergency crews in large trucks or boats went through the subdivisions of the city and county, telling residents it was time to leave. Now, those who were here during the 1990 flood wanted a comparison. Worse, maybe 5 times worse, was the somber reply from the governor's emergency management regional representative, Clay Kennelly. On Tuesday, October 18th, the rain began to let up. By then, 18.5 inches of rainfall had strangled the official rain gauge near City Hall in downtown Liberty, and did it in just a period of 24 hours. By the end of October, 30.7 inches of rain would be recorded here for that 1 month's time. Considering our annual rainfall is just over 50 inches, that October 1994 total was again an unprecedented figure. By now, the horror took on an even uglier face. The river, as was predicted, began to climb rapidly. Later in the day, water from the earliest gate releases at the lake began to arrive here to intermingle with the rainfall runoff between Liberty and the lake. The river gauge at the Highway 90 bridge quickly rose to 28.50 feet above sea level. That's nearly 5 feet above bankful stage of 24 feet. The most amazing thing is that amounted to a 13-foot rise in one horrifying day. It had just never happened like that before. Not before Lake Livingston Dam was built in 1969, and not since the dam was built. In recorded history, this was a whole new ball game. Early on Tuesday, Travis Park subdivision residents were asked to evacuate, but very soon that request became an order. City officials and emergency workers turned their eyes upriver. The 88 miles of winding, twisting, churning river between here and the lake was spreading out in every direction as it bottlenecked into the much narrow river basin of Liberty County. Local folks were now being attacked on every front. Hundreds of heroes worked wherever they were needed. Heavy equipment machinery operators were building temporary levees, and there were prayers, lots and lots of prayers.
We had to declare the national emergency, and I had to take over the operations of making sure everything was coordinated with city management and our emergency management forces. The pleasure I had was working with some outstanding professionals that were doing their jobs and then coming and reporting to us to ask detailed questions that need to be answered that they necessarily didn't have the power to answer, and we would have to make those decisions. It was my first, and I hope my last, experience of this nature. But it was very difficult, but it was very rewarding working with an outstanding staff of people. I guess the low point for me was driving home middle one night and realizing the water was coming in over the park, coming into town, and knowing that there was very little that we could do. The other individuals have mentioned the Travis Park, the decisions that we had to make as a group to back off of Travis Park so we would not lose lives. That was always our first concern, about losing lives. And then the bottom was getting in the helicopter and riding over town to see the true damage. Going up here, knowing what the area looked like very well on the ground, but never seeing it from the air, and seeing places where you had grown up under 3 or 4 feet of water, and seeing the damage and the hurt that our citizens were going through. That was our low point.
By early Wednesday morning, the city looked, as Mayor Pro Tem Sandy Pickett said, like a war zone. Military vehicles and helicopters, 113 DPS officers, 135 National Guardsmen, 19 from Parks and Wildlife. Liberty County Sheriff's Department was 60. There was 65 city and county fire department personnel. U.S. Fish and Wildlife sent 12. State Emergency Management with 10 and 2 from the Coast Guard. 200 volunteers had accepted assignments specific enough to be counted among those working full-time, and of course, the ever-present Liberty City Police Department. Airborne in a National Guard Black Hawk helicopter, City of Liberty Fire Chief Jamie Galloway, who doubles as the City Emergency Management Coordinator, saw the river had begun to flow over what is known as the WCID No. 6 levee. That earthen structure is located outside the city to the north, but performed an important role in keeping major floodwaters away from the city limits from that direction. Water was, by then, rolling in waves over the top of the northern levee, eroding it out and sometimes botting out big chunks. Waves swept south, causing the water to run in behind the city's own levees and through the city park, to the apartments on Cook Road, flooding them for a second time. The South Liberty oil field, which always floods because it has all river frontage, had long since been underwater. Back up to the north, that water was doing something even worse than flooding apartments and subdivisions in places never flooded before. It was racing toward an already overtaxed drainage system. That meant once those ditches overflowed beyond what natural and pump-driven drainage can handle, there was no longer a way to get water out of the city. In those pre-dawn hours of Wednesday, October 19th, evacuations reached a fever pitch. Both Golden Charm and Beaumont nursing homes evacuated most residents, nearly 200, to churches in downtown Liberty. Baptist Hospital moved their patients to other hospitals or, in less serious conditions, sent them home. The emergency room remained open and ready for a few more hours. At 11:30 Wednesday night, more records collapsed under the weight of the Trinity floodwaters. The Trinity River gauge here is maintained by the U.S. Geological Survey. During the worst period, the gauge was read every 30 minutes by staff members of the local radio station.
Residents of this area are accustomed during fast rises to see a 3 or 4 foot rise in one day. Instead, the measurement apparatus spun wildly to 30.05, an all-time new record. But it wasn't through. Exhausted city work crews, some standing waist-deep in water in the woods immediately north of Travis Park subdivision, were trying to keep ahead of the rise by fashioning a temporary dirt levee in front of the WCID No. 6 levee to slow the flow into the city drainage system. Now the order came for them to back off, but they just didn't want to give up. It took 3 commands from Public Works Director Joe Ed Stiffelmeyer, City Manager Norman Dykes, and Mayor Paul Henry before the exhausted but courageous crews agreed to make a run for safety. They looked back over their shoulders as they drove south through the streets of Travis Park and watched the water quickly rising into darkened, mostly evacuated homes. That part of town and the entire city drainage system had been surrendered to the Trinity River. There was no doubt that conditions were going to get much worse. Mayor Paul Henry, anguished over invading the rights of citizens to move about freely, but weighing the good against the bad, he finally gave a curfew order for...
I was left homeless for a week, so I had an interesting perspective of being involved with the decisions the city was trying to make and helping coordinate all the various efforts, but also dealing with my own feelings of being out of my home and worrying about my neighbors. One of my first initial personal decisions was to leave my home. The mayor called me after we had been debating whether to ask for Travis Park evacuation or not, and said, "Sandy, I think you need to get out of there. I don't think you need to be in there." And the decision I had to make was, did I need to stay there and try to help my neighbors, or did I need to get out and be here to do whatever or what little I could do to help the city? And at the request of the mayor, I did leave. And it was very hard to leave because the neighbors in my area had already pitched in together and trying to evacuate all the automobiles they could. And my front yard was somewhat of a staging area, and I was trying to offer what little aid and comfort I could to the people trying to move a lot of automobiles in a very short period of time. But I did make that decision to leave, and so I was in the isolated part of town for about a week, out of my home. At the time I left, I did not believe my home would flood. I didn't believe Travis Park would flood, and I was very shocked when the flooding did start taking over various houses in our neighborhood. One of the other very strong personal memories I have of concern was one of the earlier times I went up in the helicopter to survey the damage in the community, and we did circle over my neighborhood. Chief Galloway, the fire chief, was in the helicopter, also Councilman Allison, and as we circled the town in a rapidly rotating helicopter, we flew over my subdivision, and we saw a house on fire, surrounded by water, knowing full well that there was not going to be any way we could get fire trucks in there. And Chief Galloway did call radio down that we did have a fire there. As far as I know, that was the first indication to the neighborhood. But it was a very overwhelming experience to see houses surrounded by water and then a house on fire in the middle of it. Initially, I didn't know whether it was my house or someone else's, because when you're going in a helicopter rotating, it's very difficult to get your bearings. So that was a very personal, traumatic time for me. In terms of the city, some very stressful times, I think, in my memory has been mentioned before. The decision to evacuate our city personnel from the Travis Park levee. They had been trying to shore up some low points with sandbags, anything they could, and it was close to midnight one night when we were in contact here at City Hall with the city personnel out there on the banks, and the banks had started eroding. Our personnel were in danger. We all knew it, and the decision was made to pull them off. And I remember the mayor saying, just to announcing to those of us who were in the manager's office, "Well, we've lost Travis Park." And we didn't know what that meant. Really, we didn't know whether we'd lost the whole subdivision, where we were going to lose every life that was out there. It was extremely traumatic. My husband was out there. I called him up and I said, "Do whatever you can do to help the other people get out, but I want you out of the house and I want you helping." And he did, and he, I think, came in with the last truckload of people that were evacuated from Travis Park that night. Others did remain in their houses. We are very grateful that no one did lose their life or come to serious harm. The other traumatic event for the city, which we lucked out on, we came very near to losing electrical power for the entire community. This would have been devastating. We had already had some serious losses of water, which is going to hurt during our recovery effort. We were able eventually to trace it and find out where, but it's very hard to find a water leak when there's water on top of everything. So the near loss of electricity and the serious water shortages are also high in my mind as to very serious occurrences during this already this existing emergency.
Shortly after midnight Thursday morning, the Ugly River crested. The time was noted at 12:45 Thursday morning. The wire weight gauge, known to be more reliable than the electronic manometer gauge at the river, had reached a staggering 31 feet above sea level. Remember, normal flow is in the 8 to 14 feet range. Bankful or flood stage is 24 feet, and here the gauge shuddered as it read 31 feet above sea level. When all was said and done, 500 homes in the city and from 60 to 80 businesses, depending on what you call damage, were affected by either the rain or the river flood here in town. But on Thursday morning, when the old river crested, the worst was not yet over. Near the old Allied Tube and Conduit plant in South Liberty stands the main electrical substation for the city of Liberty. The levee that protects the substation was disappearing fast, according to Electrical Department Supervisor Don Ivey. The river's contaminated waters were climbing ever higher. The river was at or near crest at the Highway 90 gauge, but continued to spread out ever wider. 51 inmate volunteers were bussed in from the Hightower Prison Unit in nearby Dayton. Liberty County inmate workers and probationers joined valiant city workers in filling sandbags at the city warehouse yard, then transported by trucks and boats to the prison inmate and other volunteers at the substation. Sandbagging went on through the night.
Friday morning, Mayor Paul Henry spoke to the citizens over the local radio station, making the somber announcement that residents should be prepared to lose power very soon, perhaps in less than an hour. Now some people already evacuated to churches in downtown Liberty were evacuated a second time, fearing the power would fail and that water might reach even there. Many of these people were residents of one of the two local nursing homes. Our neighbors in Dayton to the west opened doors of their churches and homes to take in evacuees. Red Cross centers were set up in several places. The VFW Hall on Main Street in Liberty was a Red Cross evacuation center during the rain flood, but now the river floodwater began pouring into that building, and those evacuees were then moved to Dayton. Elsewhere in town, water poured through Travis Park. It damaged 64 of the 74 homes.
Bill, the impact of this flood was just tremendous, coming from the river and from the previous rain. There were really virtually few parts of town that were not affected. Water poured in from the west across Bowie Street from the river, flooding the school and hospital. Water came in from the south and flooded around our power plant. We had to sandbag that in order to save the power plant from losing our power to the city. Water came in from the park and flooded. It was reported to me like water was running down Texas Street, like a new river running through town, coming over Main and running south down Texas. Water was everywhere. And I guess as a city manager, you look at your resources, and all of our resources were busy. Our people did a tremendous job. Our council were all totally involved, spending many hours here at City Hall offering their assistance. All of our city employees were busy. We had to, of course, one thing I have to think about is my limited resources that I have and asking for outside help, which we did and received a lot of help from others. We looked at our resources. We had to schedule people around the clock, set up shifts so that our personnel would not all be worn out after a day or two. We knew this was going to last a while. We had the first concern, of course, was loss of life, and we had to do what we could there, and then we were looking at trying to protect the property. But it was a tremendous flood. The parts of the city that were not impacted directly by the water were impacted by the threat of the loss of power, the fact that the places where they would normally do business or where they would eat or go to school, these places were impacted. So, and also I had a tremendous concern that if we lost power, we're going to lose water, since we operate from water wells that are powered by the electricity. And we did have numerous water leaks on our system, and could not locate those because of the flood water. And so you start thinking about a city of our size without power and without water, then you've got some serious problems. You run into health problems that would occur. So we were very fortunate that we started looking towards those items and trying to do some prevention. The citizens were tremendous. They cooperated in every aspect. Couldn't have asked for any better cooperation from our citizens. people, we had sandbags, people offered to help sandbag and did help. That was done for a while, and in areas it did help. Some areas proved to be fruitless because of the high river. But it gave us the chance to all pull together, work together. I think the community is stronger because of it. People have a desire to come back. I guess that's the American way, but you really see it here in Liberty, and our citizens, the way they have responded. And, I think that, even though it was a terrible, tragic event, severe loss of property, we had over $15 million, as you know, in damage. Approximately 400 homes, over 600 homes and businesses total were flooded. That's a lot for a city of our size. So, it was a tremendous impact on the city.
Now choked to overflowing, the water spilled across the swollen drainage ditches like they weren't even there and poured unchecked into over 1/3 of the homes in Liberty, Texas. Damage to homes and stores ranged from wet floors to water 5 feet deep inside.
Somewhere during all of this, Emergency Management Coordinator Jamie Galloway was taking another flight over the city and points north in the National Guard helicopter. He looked down and spotted smoke rising from a house on a Tuscasita Drive. Upon closer examination, he realized in that ocean of water an attractive 2-story home belonging to local businessman and Justice of the Peace Bill Sonny Lofton was on fire. A well-meaning neighbor reportedly put gasoline into a generator engine that was to power Lofton's freezer while the power was out. Flames from the nearby water heater and the wet, heavy air ignited gasoline fumes. The large home, one of only 10 in the subdivision that had escaped floodwaters, burned to the ground. Galloway had dispatched his firefighters standing by, but Travis Park was unreachable under these conditions, and a big 2.5 National Guard trucks were pushed into service. Other firemen came by airboat and motorboat, but the time it took to pull those resources together was just too much of a head start. The beautiful house burned to the ground, surrounded by floodwaters that could not reach it. Meanwhile, throughout the city came reports of dropping city water pressure. After much searching, water department crews discovered saturated ground had begun to shift, breaking water mains as it did. Water supply was cut off to some portions of the town, bringing the pressure back up elsewhere. Local contractors were hurried to the site of the broken mains, and along with city crews, dug through the mud and water, located the mains, welded repairs in place, and restored pressure. Now, however, residents were told not to drink what may have become contaminated water. Bottled water was arriving by the trailer truckload. It was not long before the water was tested, found to be safe, and restored to public use.
There were other stories of lost livestock and pets left behind during the evacuation. The Animal Rescue League arrived from California and set up a temporary animal shelter on Main Street. In a few days, literally hundreds of pets were restored to their owners, or if they were safe at home, these pets were fed by their rescuers and left to be checked on later. Cattle, deer, and other animals were rescued off high ground by the hundreds, some in more dramatic fashion than others. Families back in their homes that were working on cleanup but also having to take care of children, enter then a church-sponsored organization from out of state. Babysitting, kid-watching services were established at the Immaculate Conception Catholic Church to give a safe place for kids to be left while schools were out and parents were busy. But the real question remained, would it ever end? Finally, a victory. Mayor Paul Henry announced on the local radio station that those Hightower prison inmates, city workers, and volunteers had stacked about 9,000 sandbags around the electrical substation, and now the river had finally stopped rising around it. It was amazing. The city's electrical power had never gone off. We learned later that sometimes the growing rows of sandbags were only inches ahead of the rising river water, but always those heroes had stayed just barely ahead, and in this case, barely was good enough.
The mayor made that announcement around 9 p.m. Friday. The substation was saved. Many talked later of how demoralizing it would have been to have had to fight the fight in the darkness. When they spoke of that possibility, most shuddered. The people of Liberty drew a big sigh of relief. It was the first good news in a long time. Surely it must have been months. No, really just days. But finally we did have some good news. True enough, the power was turned off to some sections of town intentionally. The city electric department officials feared water might rise around some transformers positioned at ground level and become lethal. But most of the city maintained power throughout the disaster. In the face of this kind of overwhelming spirit and courage, even the mighty Trinity River started to back down. The sun came out, and all over Liberty, as the water began to drop, people began immediately to work their way homeward. There was much to be done. Unless you saw it, you would not believe the huge piles of contaminated debris that was dragged to the curbside on directions from City of Liberty officials. Quickly, City Crews Waste Management Incorporated, who is the local garbage contractor, with much help from the Texas Department of Transportation and the City of Baytown, loaded it on dump trucks and hauled it away. As quickly as one pile disappeared from the curbs, the giant mounds reappeared. Hundreds of homes lost everything, and the evidence of their lives was now reduced to giant mounds of soggy furniture, appliances, mattresses, clothing, and tons upon tons of boxes of family treasures. All of it laid on the curb to be crushed, hauled away, and burned.
This was another bad time for residents as the full impact of how much they had lost began to sink in. As folks worked at home, Red Cross trucks rolled up and down the streets, making sure families had plenty to eat and drink. Pickup trucks went from street to street, delivering bottled water. With amazing speed, local stores reopened to customers in great need. Many opened their front doors while still hauling damaged items out the back door.
It's been approximately 2 years since the flood. Most all the homes have been repaired that are going to be repaired. We have very few that just did not get repaired. All the businesses have reestablished and remodeled, and I suppose a lot of people, through the very generous help of the federal government with SBA loans, etc., not only remodeled, improved their houses, brought them back to what they were, also spent time to make some necessary changes they've been wanting to make for some time. The businesses improved their businesses and their structures, so we've all come together and have improved ourselves so that we can make a better future for Liberty. What the city has done since the flood, and I say the city, the people of Liberty have done since the flood, we made a stand and said, we can't allow this to happen again. So we started on a $5 million drainage project, which over half the money will be spent to build a levee from the north to the railroad track to protect the city from this happening again. And the levee will be 2 feet higher than the highest point for the water during the 1994 flood. We're halfway through that levee system now. We're just about finished with levee 1 on the project 1, and we hope to start project 2 the first of next year that will complete it around to the railroad track. After we complete that, then we go into working on some, we hope, serious drainage problems with the additional money to help alleviate some of the problems that we had in the first flood of '94. If you'll remember, there were 2 floods, one for the range and one for the river. And we will be working on the drainage and hopefully to take care of a lot of those problems. So Liberty has come back. We're strong, and I believe we've made a better place than where we were before the flood.
Everybody has different impressions about different things at different times. We were asked at the radio station to be a part of keeping the citizens as informed as possible, and so every time an announcement was to be made, we were called to City Hall. It got to the point over the first 3 days that I just dreaded getting that next call, because every announcement that was made either by the city manager or the mayor seemed to be worse than the last one was. And that reached the point where it was really getting depressing, because when's the good news going to start? Probably the low point of all that was when the mayor called us over to the City Hall and announced to the community that there's a very strong possibility, almost a certainty, that the city power would go out. The levee that was being hastily constructed around the power plant was not coming up fast enough. The water was coming up faster than it was. And so for a long time, we thought we were going to lose electrical power, as already has been pointed out. Probably one of the high points was when the announcement came that the levee had been saved, that because of incredible efforts of city work crews and also a lot of help from the inmates from the various different prison units in the Dayton area, they had stayed just a little bit ahead of the floodwater until finally it stopped rising and the levee came on up above it, and they felt secure the river had capped out and the substation was saved, or the power plant was saved. Cannot imagine even for a moment how we were going through all the horror we went through, and to add to it the fact that we had no electrical power either. Thank heavens we never had to find that out. During the course of all these events, the radio station's job was to try to keep all the information about all the changes and all the problems that were occurring and let folks know what they could do about it and what the answers were. But we were also having to read the river gauge by hand. The automatic river gauge had gone out during the course of the flood, and so we required river readings that were done by hand. And the United States Geological Survey allowed us access to their equipment so we could do that. The city needed to know how fast the river was coming up and when it was going to cap out, so they knew exactly what additional problems they were going to have. So all this was real important. And so getting river readings every 30, 45 minutes became our responsibility. And that was no fun either, because every time we went down there, it had risen several more feet in some cases, or a few more inches in other cases. But finally it capped out at 31 feet, which is substantially above what it ever topped off at before in the flood. And boy, we all sure were glad to see that happen. Because of the city's trust in the radio station, all the other agencies began calling us with all the information that could help people. And that started coming in very easily to us and didn't require us to go out and make so many calls. That was a big help. And I remember that as being one of the high points. All this information is coming to us as fast as we can get it out on the air, and we weren't going to have to go out and chase it down. We were able to help the public faster because these agencies helped us. The mayor's announcement, as I said, the Lakeville substation was saved, was probably one of the high points. But after the flood had started to recede and all the debris started showing up on the curbs, that was when probably I went through the second level of really bad memories. But that one little personal memory that sticks out the most is when I go into my neighborhood and go home every night, I had this little thing I do. It's always a little bit late at night, a little after dark when I get home, and I look over this neighbor of mine's house, and the drapes are always open on the front room. The lady of the house, who's a marvelous piano player, is always sitting there playing the piano. Her husband's sitting in the chair nearby reading the newspaper, and I always used to think to myself, all's right with the world. She's playing the piano, he's reading the paper, everything's okay. And I remember when all the debris was showing up on the curb one evening as I came into the house several days after the flood had withdrawn, I was looking out there and seeing that beautiful blonde piano, baby grand piano, laying out on the curb waiting for the crushers and the dump trucks to come and haul it away. And for some reason or other, that struck me as just a horrible moment, and that's burned in my memory forever. That beautiful piano laying on that curb, it was kind of symbolic of all that was bad about what had happened the previous days. But the spirit of liberty won. The river didn't win, and that's a lot of fun to remember as I look back on it.
Statistics tell us our county experienced tens of millions of dollars in damage. They say that 18,000 Liberty Countyans were affected by the flood. 5,000 homes, 150 businesses across the county were damaged to some degree by the Great Flood of 1994. Liberty County, often the victim of floods in the river bottom lowlands, had met the river on new ground, never before scarred by floodwaters. There we stood, eye to eye with Old Man River. It was in the final analysis the river that blinked. It beat folks around here for a while, but it was our people who finally, as always, who made the difference. Probably in about 50 years or so, some reporter will ask an old veteran of this great flood of Liberty County if the county could recover from some new challenge. The answer, like always, will be something like, sure we can if we stick together like we did back then. With a final wink, he or she will say, of course, folks around here were pretty tough back in '94.